Greetings and welcome to Beyond the Walls. I am Jeremy Roth-Gushel. On this episode, I speak with journalist exposer of the Israeli National Security State and longtime publisher of Tikkun Olam, Richard Silverstein, about his inquiries into the targeted Israeli state-sponsored assassination of beloved Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh and its escalated police state wake, and his trio of articles exposing the reckless corruption of former Israeli intelligence chief Yossi Cohen, who in addition to aiding and abetting Israeli billionaire Dan Gertler in his securing the profits of his rape and pillage of the Congolese nation, exposed the Israeli security state while executing assassinations in the midst of an affair and directly undermined American policy, hoping to further uncover Israel-Palestine beyond the walls. This is Jeremy Roth-Gushel with Beyond the Walls. I'm very pleased to be joined once again by friend of the show and leading muckraker of the Israeli security state, journalist and writer Richard Silverstein, who has published the Tikkun Olam blog since 2003. It exposes the secrets of the Israeli national security state. He publishes regularly at Middle East Eye, The New Arab, and Jacobin magazine. His work has also appeared in Al Jazeera English, The Nation, Truth Out, and other outlets. Thank you so much for joining us, Richard Silverstein.
It's great to be with you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. And we are going to get to a barn burner, I would say, triptych of deep muckraking journalism where you expose apparent high-level corruption, also apparently state-sponsored by a former Israeli intelligence chief, Yossi Cohen, in a series of 3 articles, the latest that you just published in recent days. But before we go there, let's touch on an article that you wrote May 13th, titled Israel, the Police State. If you are Palestinian, you can't even die in peace, that covers the wake and funeral of the assassination of beloved Palestinian-American Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh.
Abu Akleh was a beloved journalist and figure in Palestine. She was everywhere that the Israeli occupation forces went. She went into refugee camps whenever there was going to be an operation. She was there to cover it. She did so as a journalist, clearly marked as a journalist. In fact, I read an article by the other journalists who were accompanying her when she was killed, and they said they deliberately go up to the Israeli military forces with their press vests beforehand so they know who they are and what they're doing. And that is so the Israelis will not target them as press. And they did that in this case too. So that meant that the Israelis who killed her knew exactly who she was and where she was. She was murdered by a sniper, an Israeli sniper, regardless of what Israel is claiming. They were trying to muddy the waters by claiming that a Palestinian bullet might have killed her, or maybe Israeli bullet that sort of ricocheted off a wall might have killed her. All of that is a smokescreen. As I said, I want to use a stronger term, but probably shouldn't on your podcast. And afterwards, her funeral. It's traditional at Palestinian funerals that the coffin be carried by mourners, pallbearers, from the church or wherever the ceremony is held to the cemetery. And when the Palestinian mourners tried to do that, They had done things that provoked the Israeli forces on the scene. They had plastered the route of the funeral cortege route with Palestinian flags, and they were chanting Palestinian national slogans. And Israeli forces intervened and started to beat up the mourners, including the pallbearers. And at one point, the casket almost fell to the ground. Luckily, the pallbearers were able to retrieve it. But the Israelis forced the procession to stop, and they forced them to take the casket in an ambulance to the cemetery. So that's why I wrote that you can't even die in peace if you're Palestinian. That the Israelis will kill you, and then they will stop you from being buried. So what I wanted to mention as well is this morning the CNN produced a definitive investigatory piece about the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, and they used the term targeted assassination because they proved by examining all of the forensic data. They called on acoustic forensic specialists and weapons specialists that they name in the article to discuss the trajectory of the bullet, the type of bullet, the amount of time and the location of where the sniper would have been and where she was. And they also have videos of the whole incident and videos of the specific vehicles that were involved in the killing. And they note that the particular one where the sniper was a new kind of vehicle that had a special sniper aperture. The previous vehicles are just sort of basically open with a window, so the sniper had to accommodate to all of that in order to shoot. And in addition, one of the witnesses said that the bullet that hit her in the neck was targeted very precisely so that it would hit her between her helmet and her vest. I don't know if she was wearing a bulletproof vest, but it was a vest that said press. So it hit her in the most vulnerable part, and it hit her in the neck where it would kill her. So that's why they're using the term targeted assassination, and that's why I used a similar term in my coverage. This was Israel targeting a nemesis. And I should note that the IDF spokesperson who talked about this killing said that the cameras of the journalists carried were weapons. They said the cameras are weapons. So Israel sees journalists as militants. They see them as armed militants. They make no distinction between journalists and civilians or Palestinian militants, which is a new development. And we know that Israel is being investigated by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. Up until now, the investigation has been mostly about Operation Protective Edge, which was in 2014 when 2,300 Palestinians were killed in that. But each episode like this amasses further evidence, and since the investigation is open, they can include an incident like this in their brief that they're examining. It's not clear. There's no definitive decision been made on whether they're going to open an investigation, but they have formally announced that they will. So they're not yet quite examining evidence as far as we know. But all of this becomes evidence that will be used.
And in the immediate wake of the Abu Akleh's assassination, I saw some Israeli access journalism, security access journalism, suggesting that if there were to have been an Israeli bullet involved in her murder or her assassination, that it wouldn't have been the standard IDF snipers, but that there was a special forces unit, Unit 217, frequently called the Duv Devan unit, which is known for undercover operations and blending in at times amongst local Palestinian populations. And I haven't not read through the CNN dive to see if there's any forensics added to this to either prove or disprove that aspect. But it has been directly stated what I saw the latest line from the Israeli government itself after they have moved beyond their original muddying of the waters of trying to say that it was Palestinian crossfire or a potential ricochet of an Israeli bullet, have now directly stated that no matter what, they're not going to investigate because no matter who killed her, there was no crime. And
Right.
what I would appreciate is if you would be willing to then fill out the other aspect of your the police state article that covers the wake of her assassination and how the provocations by Israeli police, even up to the point of attacking her pallbearers, her casket carriers in the midst of the funeral procession, that this is represents the ongoing escalation but also the long-term normalization of the Israeli police state directed especially at Palestinians.
Well, what I meant to say in my article was that we all know what the occupation is. We all know that it's illegal. We all know that it's been going on for many decades. But the murder of a journalist really escalates the terms of the conflict. And it's meant really to demoralize Palestinians. It would be sort of like if your listeners are old enough to remember Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw, it would be as if a sniper from the U.S. military or police force would have murdered him. And not just murdered him by accident, but deliberately targeted him. And I think that's inconceivable for the average American to think about that. But that's what they've done. They murdered her in cold blood, and it was yet another humiliation by the Palestinians, by the Israelis against the Palestinians, and it's in the context of terror attacks that happened inside Israel. There have been five, I believe, and this has been an unprecedented development for Israelis. They're not used to, for a decade or more, there haven't been any serious terror attacks in Israel, and they had five in quick succession within a month. This has really jarred the Israelis, who are very insulated from occupation, very insulated from any Palestinians, except those who come to work in Israel and have menial construction jobs. They're not privy to see the degradation and the oppression and the pain inflicted on the Palestinians. So when these attacks happened and these Palestinians entered Israel and did them, it was a shock to the system. And the way Israelis respond to this is by escalating violence. Their attitude is, if you want to kill us, for every one of us that you kill, we're going to kill 10 of you. That's not the spoken or public point of view. Nobody says that, but that's basically what happens, and that's why killing a beloved, key, respected figure in the Palestinian world is Israel saying, "Okay, the gloves are off. Whatever inhibitions or restrictions there might have been before, that's gone now. We're gonna take it out on you and take it out in a way that you will not forget."
And you finish your Israel, the police state article by calling for investigation and a push on the American government side to get off their butts and get this held to account. And also accounting for that she is not just a beloved Palestinian journalist, but she's also Palestinian American, in addition to being a
Right.
journalist.
Right. She's a U.S. citizen. So, for God's sakes,
Uh-huh.
if our government counts for anything, a journalist and a U.S. citizen. So, what if if what is going to cause the U.S. government? What would it take to move the U.S. government off the dime, to get it off its ass, to do what it's supposed to do to protect American citizens overseas? If we're willing to help people, American citizens who are imprisoned in foreign countries, if we're willing to do all sorts of things for Americans, why the hell are we not willing to press the Israelis to have an independent investigation, to send, for example, U.S. FBI agents and forensic specialists to go to Israel or to go to Palestine and do an investigation, forensic investigation, and examine the body, examine the bullet, examine the weapon, and force Israel to produce those things. Force Israel to produce all the surveillance data and camera footage that it has. Force the Israelis to tell them who was in that vehicle when the sniper killed her. None of that's happening. The U.S. has mumbled a couple of nice phrases about how they're concerned about the killing and it's a terrible thing, and we're encouraging, they're encouraging the Israelis and Palestinians to somehow get together and do a joint investigation when Israel, in a completely normal, everyday way, every time that there is a killing like this, it always clears every Israeli soldier of any criminality and never holds anybody accountable. So the U.S. government is trying to force the Palestinians to cooperate with the Israelis so that the Israelis can then say, not only are we not guilty of this, but we were willing to engage in an investigation with the Palestinians. Therefore, that clears us. So the Palestinians are not stupid. Why are they going to cooperate with a sham like that? So going back to that, Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, and the UN Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, I think her name is, both called for the investigation. And even at the Georgetown graduation ceremony, when a Palestinian American, he came up to this woman who had been carrying a sign demanding accountability for Shireen. He came up to her, shook her hand, and said, "We're aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. We're gonna do something, right?" And then, as she said to him, "And why don't you end Israeli U.S. military support for Israel as a punishment for this?" He turned around on his heels and walked away. So
Mm.
the U.S. doesn't want to face inconvenient truths. It wants to stay in some kind of, cloud nine, kind of, up in the sky, kind of above everything, and think that it can get away with mouthing platitudes. And it's really despicable. Our unwillingness to take any action, but of course it relates to the fact that we have a powerful, strong Israel lobby that whatever Israel doesn't want, the lobby doesn't want. And the difference between Israel and the lobby is the lobby can force people, can pressure presidents, senators, and members of Congress to stop things that they don't want to happen. So certainly the AIPAC and other lobby groups have been having private conversations and lobbying with the State Department and other major figures to put the kibosh on any serious U.S. Role or statements about this. And now, we've got the Ukraine war, and we've got Biden changing the subject by going to Asia. And so they're hoping the story is going to go away. So if it goes away, it takes them off the hook. And that's their modus operandi.
Well, and the series of muckraking articles that you write are the type of journalism that will continue to bring these kinds of issues to the forefront in a similar fashion to the story that you just pointed out about the graduating Georgetown student who had her Palestinian flag and then refused to shake Secretary Blinken's hand. And then he goes and
Right.
pursues her, and then she gives him the actual reality of the policy that would be logically pursued in a normal diplomatic relationship with an alleged ally and friend nation that kills a citizen and journalist. That you would think that there would be a severe sanctioning, let alone an investigation and accountability of that. But the combination of journalism and activism like that will hopefully make sure that these kinds of issues will cannot be swept away. And so, with the very recent assassination in Iran of a senior member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a man named Khodoyari, killed by two alleged Israeli assassins on a motorcycle. Let's get into your articles on the former Mossad Israeli intelligence chief Yossi Cohen, who actually oversaw the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientist Fakhrizadeh. While some of these happenings that you lay out very clearly in your articles, he was engaged in them and apparently maybe distracted by them and giving up potential operational security
Hmm.
disclosures along the way. So, would you start out by explaining the your first article in this series titled "Yossi Cohen, Mossad's Man in Kinshasa"? Israeli oligarch Dan Gertler recruited powerful figures in the U.S. and Israel to lobby on behalf of his corrupt business ventures. Will you explain Yossi Cohen, Dan Gertler, and the relationship to Kinshasa, the Congo, and then back to the United States?
Sure. Well, let's start with Dan Gertler. He's an Israeli ultra Orthodox Jew who started with business ventures in Africa, eventually befriended key figures in the Congolese regime. Joseph Kabila was the president at the time. He was enormously corrupt and had an enormous appetite for corruption. And via a $300 million bribe, Kabila was able to bid for mining concessions in the Congo. And the Congo is enormously rich in resources from oil, gold, cobalt, which is used in our cell phones and our electric vehicles, molybdenum, which is another mineral that's needed for similar devices. And so Gertler went in and won concessions, especially to mine cobalt. He employs poor Congolese workers in peonage, and he forces them to mine in a way that people haven't mined for centuries. With picks, and they have to break rocks, and they take the rocks and put them in bags, and then they haul them up out of the mine, and it's just backbreaking labor. And Gertler, of course, makes no effort to ameliorate their conditions or their living conditions after they're done with their work. It's just no running water in the houses, no electricity, no schools, no nothing, no infrastructure created. Just simply raping the resources of the country out of rapacious greed. Now, the problem is that there's a civil war at the time going on in Congo. Millions of people are being killed. I think 4 million was the number. You've got neighboring countries like Rwanda and Uganda either financing armies that are fighting in Congo to advance their respective interests, or their own troops are invading the Congo to occupy different parts of the country. And while they're doing it, these particular armies are themselves taking advantage of the resources and stealing them. So the U.S. wants to stop this. The U.S. wants to, maybe for its own interests in needing cobalt and other things, wants there to be some stability in Congo. It understands how corrupt and venal and how brutal Kabila is, so it determines it's going to get rid of Kabila. So it succeeds in forcing him to leave office, and a moderate reformist is elected who the U.S. favors. So when he comes into power, he wants to cancel all of the concessions because he is trying to wipe clean the slate and start over again. So the new Congolese president is Felix Tshisekedi. I'm not an expert on Congolese names, but so forgive me. But he comes into power and he says, everybody who's been raping our country and stealing our resources, I'm starting over, clean slate. So Gertler loses his mining concession, and he is beside himself. So he starts by looking to help in Israel, where he's a citizen, and he goes to powerful figures in the Israeli government, Bibi Netanyahu, and Yossi Cohen, who's the Mossad director, and he says, you got to help me. It's unprecedented for the Israeli government to go to bat on behalf of an individual citizen who is caught in a corrupt business deal. In spite of that, Yossi Cohen gets on a plane and 3 times in 6 months goes to the Congo and lobbies on behalf of Gertler. What does he do in those 3 visits? The first visit, he comes in secret. He doesn't tell the president that he's coming. He doesn't tell anyone that he's coming. He goes directly from the airport to visit Joseph Kabila, the former dictator, and we don't know what he says to Kabila. We don't know what the purpose of the meeting is. And then he leaves. He hasn't met with the president. He hasn't, done anything above board. Then he decides he comes a second time. This time he does meet with the president, Tshisekedi, and he says to the president very nicely, you don't mind if I go visit Joseph Kabila, do you? Well, Tshisekedi can't very well say no because this is the director of the Israeli intelligence. He's not about to start a big fight with him. So he says, go ahead. If you got to do it, go ahead and do it. So that's the second time. Oh, and by the way, on that second trip, he comes and lands in the airport in Kinshasa, and he tells the immigration authorities, I'm not getting out of my plane until you agree that you will not leave any record of my trip here. So there can't be any public disclosure of what happened. The authorities say, no, that's not the way we operate. So there's a standoff. And what does Cohen do? He calls Kabila. Kabila appoints this brutal thug who's his number 2 guy. The number 2 guy goes to the airport, who knows what he does, threatens, pays off the immigration authorities. There is going to be no record of Cohen coming into the country. That's the second trip. Third trip, he comes again unannounced. Unannounced, the Israeli intelligence chief comes into a foreign country unannounced. This is not done, never, unless you're trying to, start a war with a country. He comes and he meets with Kabila again. This time, Tshisekedi has had enough. He calls him to a meeting. He calls Cohen to a meeting in his office, and Cohen has his whole entourage. And Tshisekedi dismisses all of them and says to Cohen, waves his finger at Cohen, says, you're coming into my office. We're having a private conversation. Tshisekedi says, I know what you're doing here. You're plotting a coup to overthrow me. Now, that whether he's just afraid of that happening or really knows something, we don't know. And Cohen is angry because he knows that he's not going to be able to succeed in helping Gertler get the sanctions removed, which have been imposed on him. We can talk about it in a second. So he threatens Tshisekedi, and he says, you know what? One of my best friends in D.C. is Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State. I know Mike, and I'm going to talk to Mike. You may be the favorite of the U.S. right now, but once I get done with you, they're going to hate your guts. and you will no longer have U.S. support. Now, I'm just speculating about that, given what I know of the whole thing, but I'm fairly certain something like that happened. And Shikedi says to him, "You are persona non grata in this country." He assigns his intelligence officers to accompany Cohen to the airport. They put him on a plane. They send him back to Israel. He cannot come back to the Congo. That leaves Gertler. He's lost that avenue. So he's got these concessions that were imposed on him by U.S., UK, and Switzerland. So he figures, I'm going to turn to the U.S. That's my next plan. He hires Alan Dershowitz, ex-FBI Director Louis Freeh, and he enlists Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. They're all going to lobby the U.S. government to remove sanctions. Even though U.S. policy has been to support a new Congolese government, to create some stability in the Congo, to end the civil war there, which took 4 million lives, to create a functional government, that's U.S. policy. What Gertler wants the U.S. to do is remove sanctions so he can go back to the Congo and continue the bad old ways that he had engaged in before. Now, this is the Trump administration, right? So the U.S. senior officials in the State Department or Treasury Department may want to continue sanctions. Donald Trump isn't governed by anything that any of his civil servants tell him. He's governed by whoever the last pal is who came into the office. And what does Trump do? 5 days before he leaves office, signs a statement saying that sanctions are removed from Dan Gertler. No sanctions anymore. But Trump does this secretly. So not even the officials who opposed lifting sanctions know until later when it becomes common knowledge that what Trump has done. Now, this is so unprecedented that there is an investigation by the U.S. government of what Trump did. So Gertler has succeeded in getting the sanctions removed. He can now take all of his assets and move them all around. He can protect them in case the sanctions are slapped back on him again, which is what happens because Biden becomes president. Biden wants to overturn all of the worst things that Trump has done, including lifting sanctions. So they put the sanctions back on. Gertler now is constricted again. He's got a third plan. This time he goes to the Congo. This time he goes to the president, Tshisekedi, and says, let's work out a deal. I will pay the government of Congo $2 billion in restitution for the assets that I stole from the Congo. But he doesn't do that totally out of the goodness of his own heart. He negotiates so that he's going to get a commission. He's going to get royalties on every dollar that those mines produce. He's going to get 2.5%. What does that work out to be? $200,000 a day or $75 million a year. He doesn't have to do anything for it. He doesn't have to pay workers. He doesn't have to pay for equipment, infrastructure, shipping the stuff, refining it. Doesn't have to pay for any of that. He sits back and he gets a $75 million check every year. Now, this does not sit well, obviously, with the Congolese. It also doesn't sit well with the governments who are realizing this is kind of an inside deal. In addition, this agreement for the $2 billion has a hidden addendum that says that the Congolese government, once it gets these $2 billion, will lobby the U.S. government to remove sanctions. So the Congo, which has been raped by this guy for a decade or more, is going to go to work on his behalf to lobby Biden to get the sanctions removed. So far, that hasn't happened. And so far, there are NGOs in the Congo and other places that are lobbying themselves to make sure it doesn't happen. But Dan Gertler is now sitting pretty.
You've now taken us into the heart of your second article in this triptych. Mossad's chief meddling on behalf of Israeli oligarch angered U.S. officials, endangered U.S. Israeli relations. Yossi Cohen's intervention on behalf of Israeli oligarch Dan Gertler contradicted U.S. interests in Africa. And you point out also in this article that, in addition to what you brought up in the first article, it was apparent that even though Yossi Cohen had apparently been his operations on behalf of Gertler had been signed off by Netanyahu, they were not actually in Israeli interest, national interest. They were actually potentially uh, could do damage to Israeli national interests. And you even quote a former head of the Mossad, I believe, Ashkenazi, directly, or former head of the IDF chief of staff, Gabi Ashkenazi, declaring that there were definitely no Israeli strategic interests, and dismissing Cohen's claims as rubbish. But then, as you then point out, that additionally they double down and then even go against American national interests and all of that. Now, if all of that were not enough in terms of the level of this scandal in relationship to the former chief of Israeli human intelligence, Yossi Cohen, you now have released a third part to this, uh, titled Breaking Yossi Cohen's Sex Diaries. Yossi Cohen's mistress was a married flight attendant to whom he exposed Israeli national security secrets. And you point out that it goes way beyond even the high level scandal of a sex scandal, and all of the potential personal corruption surrounding that, and actually goes to the heart of the potential of a very sloppy seeming head of Israeli human intelligence. Will you take us through this most recent barn burner?
Yeah, before I get to that, though, I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned about Yossi Cohen and the U.S. Israel relations. Yossi Cohen, what I didn't mention earlier is that Yossi Cohen, after lobbying in the Congo, he turns around and starts lobbying in the U.S. So it wasn't only the three figures that I mentioned, Dershowitz, Free, and Thurmer. Yossi Cohen takes a trip to Washington to lobby on behalf of Gertler. The problem now is that the U.S. government has a declared policy of sanctions and having a stable Congolese government. You've got two Israelis, Gertler and Cohen, who want to contradict U.S. policy and get a corrupt Israeli mining magnate to get his properties, his mines restored to him. It flies in the face of everything that the U.S. is trying to do. This really pisses off senior civil servants in the Treasury and the State Department. They don't like Israelis coming and interfering in U.S. policy. That's where it jeopardizes U.S.-Israeli relations, because Israel has never lobbied to get someone who is on a sanctions list, an Israeli on a sanctions list, to get them off a sanctions list in contravention to U.S. policy. So we've got a whole slew of U.S. civil servants who hate the idea, who hate what Trump did, and hate the people who were responsible, who was Yossi Cohen, right? So now let's turn
But
to
before you go there, Richard, I just want to
yeah.
point out that the specific individuals that Yossi Cohen tasks as, along with Gertler, in relationship to making their case to Washington, of Louis Free, I'm going to talk about Louis Free and Alan Dershowitz, that there's a whole problem of background of compromise and relationship with foreign intelligence apparent operations in relationship to both of them. Louis Free, for example, was renowned for having actually gone to work for specifically high level Russian oligarchs
Mm-hmm,
involved with Alpha Bank, Mikhail Friedman, and a whole other
mm-hmm,
slew of very shady practices after he was FBI director. And then
mm-hmm.
Alan Dershowitz is renowned for being maybe one of the Israeli states, and specifically intelligence operations, go to legal consigliere, including the background with Jonathan Pollard, but all the way
Hmm.
through to the reputed Israeli military intelligence agent doing sexual criminal compromise operations, Jeffrey Epstein. And so you then
Hmm.
see a whole network here that has a background of highly damaging, I would say, national security compromise from the American perspective. So I just wanted to bring that in.
Well, it's very smart in a way to hire Alan Dershowitz because remember that he was one of the lawyers defending Trump in the impeachment. Um, so, so Gertler and Cohen knew Dershowitz has direct access to the president. They know they have to circumvent the bureaucracy. And they know they're going to get nowhere with the civil servants who've imposed the sanctions. They just do an end around and they go directly to Trump and they say, Trump, we got to do a deal here with you. And Trump, I've always said, is a transactional figure. He doesn't have policy. He doesn't have strategy. He just talks to whoever last guy who was in the room is what he's going to do. So they get into a room or they get into a conversation with Trump and it's all a done deal between a whole bunch of mafia type people. They've divvied up, the territory, and they've told each other that they're not going to interfere with each other and whatever they want to do with their territory. So that's Dershowitz. Smart move there. But so let's turn now to Yossi Cohen and the newest development. So a source comes to me and says, "I've got a file for you." Okay, what's in the file? Well, Yossi Cohen, the Mossad chief, has been having an affair for years with a young woman who's a flight attendant for El Al. They meet on a flight to Bangkok, and they're flirting with each other, and an affair begins. By the way, this is exactly how Bibi Netanyahu met Sarah Netanyahu. She was a flight attendant. They flirted in a first class cabin together, and he ends up divorcing his wife, and he marries Sarah. So anyway, history repeats itself. So they have a Yossi Cohen and this flight attendant whose name is Maya Harrell have a 3-year affair. I was sent the log of all of their phone conversations from 2019 to 2021. I won't get into the prurient interests of a lot of it because it deals with assignations and it deals with sex acts and all sorts of stuff. What I'm interested in is what did he tell her? What did he reveal to her about Mossad operations, about what he was doing, where he was going, who he was meeting with? And the logs are full of that information. He doesn't explicitly say, I went to Moscow and I met with Putin, but he does say, I'm just using this as an example, flew to Moscow yesterday. We'll be back in 2 days. Well, even if you don't know who he met and where he went and exactly when he got there, you know what? Pardon me. You know a shitload about more than you would know if you were just not, in possession of the chat logs. So he is exposing this is a major security breach because if someone hacked this phone data bank and downloaded or did a data dump on these phones and hacked them, anyone could have hacked them. Iranian intelligence, Russian intelligence, U.S. intelligence, they all could have this. And I've heard that this chat log has been circulated among Israeli journalists for a couple of months, but they can't publish it. They fear that it's been hacked. They fear that it might have been an illegal hack. Therefore, they can't touch it. I'm not constricted in that way because I'm in the U.S. and because I don't know how if it was a hack. I don't even know that for sure. So I can publish it, and I do. I don't publish the whole file, but I publish little snippets that are very important. So Cohen, in this documentary that I mentioned, TV documentary about Cohen and Gertler, one of the former Israeli intelligence operatives says this kind of activity can get somebody in prison, a criminal prosecution, and throw him in jail. He doesn't say actually this is what should happen with Cohen. He said this is of that caliber action. He said, for example, what happens if Yossi Cohen is on one of these foreign trips is kidnapped? He's told the world, even though he's only telling his mistress, I'm going to be in New York in 2 days. You know, I
Mm.
mean, anybody can then track where you are. They probably know what hotel you go to. They could do something like that. What happens to Israel at that point? Their Mossad chief is kidnapped. What are they going to do? It's a scandal of unbelievable proportions, what he's done. So it turns out that the story of their affair, it's alluded to last summer, but then in December, it's proven. It's really a major investigative journalist, does a TV documentary, and he gives all the goods on this. He interviews the flight attendant's husband, who's in the process of divorcing her. And what's interesting is they are still uh, the two people having the affair, Cohen and Harl, are still texting each other even during the period when the investigative journalist is airing the documentary. And what's almost hilarious in a dark way is the last conversations that they have 5 days after the TV documentary is aired. She's still begging him for sex and still asking him if he wants, I don't know if I can say this in your podcast, a dick pic or the female equivalent of a dick pic. And he's saying to her, idiot, erase everything. And in the beginning, he told her, in the beginning of this log that I looked at, make sure you erase everything, every conversation, every picture. Make sure you do. Guess what? She didn't do it. She erased the pictures because every time there's a picture, it says this has been erased. She doesn't erase any of the conversations. And that's the end of the chat. So even after the summer, when the rumors of the affair came into the public sphere, they still continue their affair for another 6 months. This is the act of an incredibly reckless person. This is the guy running the intelligence services of the state of Israel. This is a guy who thinks all the rules don't apply to him, who waves his, lifts his nose at all of the considerations, all of the constraints that any public senior official have in any major government. He goes against the policy of the U.S. to help his friend, who probably is being paid off in some way by their friend. He doesn't care about any of that. Whatever is in his personal interests, whether it's an affair or whether it's helping a billionaire, it's all he's just like Bibi. He's a narcissist personified, a megalomaniac, probably a sociopath, and a narcissist of the highest magnitude. This is what Israel has running its intelligence services.
Wow, Richard Silverstein. And before we finish up, I would just like to point out that although I'm sure some of the elements that act in such these corrupt ways, such as a Yossi Cohen, might hope that there would be erase, erase, erase. The Richard Silversteins of the world will make sure that this will not be erased, but will be put front and center for any interested people to see. There's two little details that, if you were willing to, I would like for you to tease out in relationship to this last story. One is this question of the use of WhatsApp and the
Right.
obvious resonance then and danger in relationship to the Israeli intelligence ultimately created NSO Pegasus cyber weapon software that they've been trucking and bartering, especially under Netanyahu around the world. And then the other piece, this question specifically of the logs surrounding the 3 days before the assassination of
Mm-hmm.
Iranian
Mm-hmm.
scientist Moshe
Right.
Fakhrizadeh.
Right. So look at this. These two people having an affair. How do they conduct the affair? I'm talking about technically how do they do it? They use personal cell phones, not secured cell phones, not encrypted cell phones, just the normal cell phone that you and I use. And what platform do they use? WhatsApp. WhatsApp is the very same platform that NSO Group and Pegasus malware exploited by probably the Saudis who have a license or had a license to use Pegasus that they negotiated with NSO Group. The Saudis probably compromised the communications of 1,400 human rights activists or targets of the Saudi intelligence using a vulnerability in WhatsApp, right? So they have chosen two different ways in which they've compromised themselves to conduct this affair. They use WhatsApp and all of the different platforms they could have chosen, Signal, Telegram, all these ones that have a really major reputation for preserving anonymity, being able to erase your messages after a certain amount of time. And so let's talk now about Pegasus. Pegasus has been licensed by NSO Group to 45 governments. Why do we not think it's possible that one of those 45 governments could have used NSO Group, which knows the vulnerabilities of WhatsApp, to hack into Yossi Cohen and Maya Harrell's text messages? So anyone could have gotten those text messages. It could be Israeli, could be the Shabak investigating security breaches, could be the Israeli police. It could be, like I said before, it could be Russian intelligence, U.S. intelligence. Anybody could have gotten access to this material. That is
And
how.
wasn't it, Richard, in an African context where actually American diplomats were actually targeted by Pegasus technology?
Yeah, Kenya or Uganda? Uganda, I think. 8 American diplomats were targeted by the Kenyan Uganda intelligence. Sitting diplomats in that country were their phone conversations were intercepted. So NSO Group is not above allowing its clients to target Americans. So NSO in this particular instance, if it was involved, Israel might not have known because it would be a client of NSO. NSO might not have known. And I'm not saying that NSO was the one that hacked into these conversations. I don't know how this came to me. I just know who gave it to me and a few other particulars like this. So who got it and how they got it, I don't know. I don't even care really because I just look at the material. I want to vouch that it's credible and that it's real, which I have. So anyway, that answered one of your questions. I think the other one I haven't addressed. So
The question of the 3 days before the assassination of Iranian scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh and Cohen
right.
telling his mistress that he was quote unquote terribly overloaded.
Yeah, yeah, this is just unbelievable. I mean, it's just a layer upon a layer of unbelievable things these people did. So, Maya Harrell's birthday is on November 24th, I think of 2020, possibly. And she's expecting a birthday present. She's expecting God knows what other kind of thing she's expecting. So he doesn't show up, and she's mad at him. And this is on the 25th that she tells him this. November 27th at 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours before Israel assassinates Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the founder of the Iranian nuclear program. He texts her and says, "Sorry, sweetie, I've been really overworked the past couple of days." So the Mossad chief, who's about to murder the top Iranian scientist, takes time out of his busy schedule to apologize to his mistress for forgetting her birthday.
Wow.
I'm sorry for laughing because it's very serious and very dark. But when you have something this dark, you just have to. I mean, what do? You could cry or you could laugh. So, yeah.
Yes. And well, thank you for bringing so thick a description to this whole scenario, because it is the case that the serious side of this is obviously that it was, if there's a central figure to the escalation under Netanyahu of what is called the Mabam or Mabam, the Israel's war between the wars campaign, that really escalated these targeted assassinations, that one of which apparently has just gone off again in terms of a highly inflammatory assassination of a senior member of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That this is the background, this is the corrupt background beyond the apparent crime of this kind of action. This is who is responsible for this. And so it paints, I think you paint a picture of of a system, a nation state that has high level operators that are totally out of control in many ways in relationship to any basic amount of human humility, for example, but also and even in relationship to the basics of national security and intelligence operational security. And you've painted a very damning and informative picture here, Richard Silverstein. And I thank you so much for joining us today.
Jeremy, one last closing note that just came to me. Gur Megiddo, who's an Israeli journalist who was the source for the documentary that the Israeli state TV channel ran on Gertler. Gur Megiddo is quoted in the documentary as saying, "This is a mafia state." Mm. So that's how you have to keep this all in context. It's a bunch of mobsters all out for their own benefit, and they don't give a crap about anybody else's interests or feelings or anything like that. That's Israel.
Very crucial point to end on. This is Jeremy Rothgushel. I've been speaking with journalist Richard Silverstein, who exposes the secrets of the Israeli national security state and has published Tikkun Olam since 2003. Thank you so much for joining us today, Richard Silverstein. And if you would, let our audience know where they can find your work.
I'm at Tikkun Olam, richardsilverstein.com, and I want to tell your listeners that I am going to publish a new post about the assassination that you mentioned, so people can go and read that if they want to learn more about what happened.
Thank you for your time and your work, Richard Silverstein.
Thanks again, Jeremy. I appreciate it as always.
This is Jeremy Rothgushel with Beyond the Walls. You've been listening to an interview with journalist Richard Silverstein. Until we speak again, Beyond the Walls, salam, shalom, peace out, truth and justice onwards.